page. And really, it's the same exact idea you're going to find out. Is what if it's not factorable? That's the question. And the answer is quite simple. It's been what it was since chapter 6. If it is not factorable, let's go right ahead and use the quadratic formula. If your expression is factorable, you are expected to factor it. Plain and simple. If it's not factorable, that is the only time that we're going to accept the quadratic formula. But now let's look at the problem. There's something different here. In the previous problem, it said that a binomial was a factor. Now here it says x equals 2 is a solution. I'm giving you, well, another name for solution is 0. I'm giving you one of the answers. If x equals 2 is a solution, which means my first 0 is x equals 2. Find the remaining zeros. Well, that's interesting because in this case, we didn't have to change our sign by solving. And the reason why is because I was given a 0. In the previous pages, you were given factors, and that's the difference between them. If I give you a solution, you always perform synthetic division with a solution, with a 0. So I'm going to set it up for synthetic division. 2 goes right in there. 1, -4, 6, -4. I'm going to leave my empty space, put the remainder bar, done. Now let's do synthetic division again. We drop down the first number, that stays a 1. 2 times 1 is 2. -4 and a positive 2 is a -2. 2 times -2 is a -4. 6 minus 4 is 2. 2 up here times 2 is 4. I get a remainder of 0, which again we were told was going to happen because we were doing synthetic division with a 0. So we're good at this point. Now we write down what remains. This is actually at this point very similar to the previous page. X squared minus 2x plus 2 equals 0. There's just one thing different at this point. Is, can you factor this? What multiplies to give you 2 are 1 and 2. Adds to give you -2. Well, these could add to give you 3. They could add to give you -3. Well, this is not factorable at all. And so at this point, if it's not factorable, well, we can't factor it. So we have to use the quadratic formula. So we go back up in our quadratic formula, x equals -b, which in this case, my b is -2. So negative of -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so parentheses, -2 squared, minus 4 times a, which a is 1, times c, which c is 2, all over 2a, so 2 times 1. Now we just do the math with the quadratic formula. Negative and negative is a positive, so 2 plus or minus. I'm going to have something inside that square root. On the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. So inside the square root, let's see what we have. -2 squared is 4. 4 times 1 times 2 is 8, so I have 4 minus 8, which gives me -4. That's not bad. And we need to remember, as always, when we are dealing with quadratic formula with radicals and all that, we always need to simplify our radical. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that negative, make it an I on the outside. So I have I square root of 4. Well, that's not bad because 4 is a perfect square of 2. So this becomes x equals 2 plus or minus 2i all over 2. Which, again, notice all these numbers on top can be divided by 2. I'm going to get x equals 1 plus or minus I. So let's state all the zeros. Well, we were given the first one, x equals 2. And through all of our work with synthetic division to the quadratic formula, we found 1 plus or minus I. And that represents three answers. 2, 1 plus I, 1 minus I. And our degree in the beginning was 3. We have all three answers. We are done. We went through. So really it's the same thing, except for if it's not factorable, I have to use the quadratic formula. I'm going to just solve like I did back in chapter 6. Not too bad. Let's try this one. If, and always look, if x equals -5 is a solution, and again, look at what's given to you, because the flow chart on the front page is different for each one. Is you're either given a factor or you're given a solution as 0. And in that case, we are given a solution. That means I am given one of my zeros automatically. I have no work to do. I know x equals -5, done. And I'm going to use that in the synthetic division as is. Bam, bam. Write down the coefficients 1, 1, -10, and 50. And then draw the horizontal bar, leave a gap, bam, remainder bar, do the synthetic division. We're going to get really good at synthetic division with this lesson. So we drop down to 1. -5 times 1 is -5. 1 minus 5 is -4. -5 times -4 is +20. -10 and 20 is a 10. -5 times 10 is -50. Wait for it. We get a remainder of 0. Again, we know for sure we're at least 40% right with this problem. Almost passing. And so now what we're going to do is write down the quadratic. I have x squared minus 4x plus 10 equals 0. And I have to ask myself the same question. Self, can this be factored? And the answer is no, it cannot be factored. There are no numbers that multiply to give you 10 that add to give you -4. It is not possible. And so in that case, since it can't be factored, we have to go back to the quadratic formula. And so x equals -b, so negative of -4. So it might be -4. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -4 squared, minus 4 times my a, which in this case is the 1 in front of the x squared, times my c, which is 10, all over 2a, so 2 times 1. And we just do the math at this point. Negative of a negative is a positive. 2 times 1 at the bottom gives me 2, so I have 4 plus or minus square root. And let's just do the math inside the square root. -4 squared is 16. 4 times 1 times 10 is 40, so 16 minus 40 is -24. Well, it's going to be the same exact thing it was for the other problem. At this point, we always simplify a radical. Again, that negative has to come out and become an imaginary number, I, square root of 24. And now we have to break down this radical. 24 breaks into 4 and 6. 4 breaks into 2 and 2. 6 breaks into 2 and 3. So I have a pair of 2's. The 2 and 3 can't be combined with anything. And so therefore, I square root of 24 simplifies into 2i square root of, well, the 2 and 3 remain, so we multiply them back together to get 6. So I have x equals 4 plus or minus 2i square root of 6 over 2. And the same idea as what we did before. We notice that these three numbers are even. Remember, whatever's in the radical is protected. It will not be divided out. And so if I divide everything, go to a nicer color besides red, is if I divide everything by 2, I get x equals 2 plus or minus I square root of 6. And I'll state all the zeros. Well, the first one was given to us, x equals -5. And the next one we found through hard work of synthetic division and quadratic formula to be 2 plus or minus I square root of 6. There are 3 answers here. And the degree of the original polynomial was 3. So we are set. And so this is the third page of the notes, is we're going through is what happens when you're given a 0 versus what happens when you're given a factor. Well, when you're given a 0, you just use it as is. And notice, if you were to flip through all the notes, this step says perform synthetic division with a 0. You always divide with zeros, which means the only extra work you have to do is when you're given a factor. So now, what happens if I remove everything? And that's going to be the part of the video on the last page.